Hey everyone, so I wanted to give you an example of what your assessment task might look like and how you might go about completing it. So I've just got our design brief here. So I'll swap over to our Google SketchUp design. So here, part of your assignment requires that as you go through the design process and make changes to your overall design, that you need to document this. I've chosen to include multiple designs in my Google SketchUp. For you, you might like to take a screen capture of the design process, or you might find another way that you think it better represents how your design has changed. So here I've got my first design. It's pretty boring, just a simple shelter really. I wanted to see what it would look like just to create just a pretty standard shelter, make sure that I'm familiar with the software that we're using. So this is our first one. I didn't think this met the requirements of the design, which if we go back over to our assessment task, needs to really be a functional shelter, but also a piece of play equipment. I don't think anyone would really want to use this design. So we'll go back to SketchUp, go over to our next design. So here, looking at this design, you can see that this one has changed quite a bit. So I've moved away from just a standard block shelter and I've moved to more of a dome shape. I thought that looking at the requirements of the brief, that it has to be shelter, first of all. I thought that this space could be used by students quite well. It's got a nice underground cover. I feel like there's a lot more space inside the structure by using this design as well. But again, I chose not to use this as my final piece of assessment. I thought that, again, it was quite boring. There was more that we could do. As you can see as well, I haven't really included an example of the size of this structure. I haven't inserted a person into this design, so there's no way to tell how big the structure is. And it's also unclear how it would be used as a piece of play equipment. So we're moving over to my final design now. So you can see here that I've already allocated a rough amount of space for the design. So this section or block section along the edges shows roughly how much space we have in the playground for a design. So here I've decided to keep with our kind of dome design, but you'll notice that I've also got a additional piece of shelter on the top. So as I go through, we can see that my design, it's a dome shape. I chose this because it's a bit more aesthetic. It looks better than a simple block design. I've got my windows to make sure the space is functional and that also that teachers can see through and make sure the students are okay. As we travel in here, I'll just rotate this one around. So you can see that we've got multiple benches. So I think that's a really important feature of our design. We want to make sure that it accommodates for lots of people. That's the goal of this task. So I chose to do that by making sure there's lots of seating space inside the structure. As we go here, you can see that I've got these little areas of asphalt here. I actually proposed, well, I wanted to have in my design, these are actually 4 square squares. So I thought that you could have possibly 2 courts or even more if you adapted this design. And that would allow lots of students to play at the same time. So I'd be dividing each section of these asphalt squares into 4 little 4 square courts. So that accommodates at least 16 people on each of these squares. So I thought that was a good way to make sure, because our student population is doubling, it'd be a really good way to make sure we've got space for all students. So this is mostly inside space. On the other side, it has seats as well. If we go around to the back, this is something I decided to add at the last minute. If you were approaching this as your design, you would have to think about how appropriate this section of the design is, also how much it would cost. The other section of design isn't that expensive. You could also use this as, if we're looking at the materials, I chose sustainable pieces of wood and benches. I thought that was a good way to make sure the design is good for the environment and sustainable. This section here, the black parts on the outside of our structure, I also thought that it could be used from sustainable wood. That would depend on how easily you'd be able to source wood and yeah, stuff like that. Looking at other sustainable materials as well, you can use things like asphalt, or you can, yeah, really it's up to you how you include sustainable features in your design. So I've got here the components here which are sustainable, the benches, the pieces of wood. On your structure, I'd like you to probably consider how you can use sustainability a little bit more than I already have. If we go around to the back, I've chosen to include a staircase which leads up to a second piece of shelter. Again, you can see that I've used sustainable materials here with our wood and our joinings. I'm just going to zoom in here, and you'll notice once we're inside, this serves as a little functional play area or even a mock library. So I've chosen to include this here, just like this. So we've got carpet space for students to play in when it's maybe rainy day play. We've also got spaces for bookshelves as well, which makes it a functional space. It also meets the design of the brief because it's shelter, it's got a roof overhead, and yeah, that's basically my structure again. So when you're completing this assessment task, let's go back to our design brief. Having a look, we're using Google SketchUp, which is what I've done. So I've used that piece of software that's essential for the assignment. And you need to complete a digital walkthrough of your design. So that's just what I've done there for you. So you have an idea of how you could approach that. You will also need to create a 3D printed model of your design to use during your pitch. So to do that, you'll first have to complete your design in Google SketchUp, and then from there, we'll be able to 3D print it for you. During your design pitch, you will explain the design features, propose cost, instructions for use, and explain how you met the criteria of the brief. Yep, so I've done that. Gone through my checklist. Anything else I need to include? I don't think so. I think that's everything. Perfect. So again, I've completed this by myself, but you will be completing this task as a part of a team. So I hope that gives you an idea of how you could approach this task. Remember, if you have any questions, you can go to our Blogspot page, which is where I'll upload this video as well as the design brief. So thanks for watching, guys, and best of luck in your final assessment.